Hallo zusammen zu Irisch Gut, zu den Stories und Tipps von der grünen Insel, dem Podcast von Tourism Irland. Heute gehen wir ins Museum und zwar in ein ziemlich neues und in ein ganz wunderbares, wie ich finde, ins Museum of Literature Ireland in Dublin. Direkt am St. Stephen's Green, das in der Hauptstadt liebevoll das Moli genannt wird. Ihr wisst es bestimmt, Literatur ist ganz wichtig in Irland, also sowohl das Schreiben als auch das Lesen. Die Iren sind ganz begeisterte Buchkäufer. Die Zahl der verkauften Bücher da wächst von Jahr zu Jahr. Zuletzt wurden in der Republik Irland 13 Millionen im Jahr verkauft. Bei gut 5 Millionen Einwohnern bedeutet das, dass im Schnitt jeder in Irland Pi mal Daumen 2,5 Bücher gekauft hat. Also wirklich jeder. Und ich kaufe immer mehr als 2,5, wann immer ich in Irland bin. Und in Dublin, das ja auch UNESCO City of Literature ist. Also ich kaufe meistens 5 oder 6 oder auch mal 8 oder 9. Und jedes Mal hoffe ich, dass die Airline nicht merkt, dass mein Gepäck ein kleines bisschen zu schwer ist. Über all diese Themen habe ich geplaudert mit Simon O'Connor. Das ist der Direktor des MOLI, des Museum of Literature Ireland. Daher kommt auch die Abkürzung MOLI. Und Simon ist einer der besten Kenner der irischen Literatur.
Irisch gut. Stories und Tipps von der grünen Insel.
Wenn ihr schon mal da gewesen seid im Moli, dann wisst ihr, im Mittelpunkt des Museums steht der irische Literatur-Nobelpreisträger James Joyce und sein Jahrhundertwerk, der Ulysses. Das gilt ja vielen als das berühmteste Buch gleich nach der Bibel, aber viele geben dann, wenn man mal so ein bisschen nachhakt, auch zu, dass sie das eigentlich gar nicht gelesen haben. Das ist nicht nur ein unfassbar dickes Werk, sondern das ist auch tatsächlich ein sehr kompliziertes. Es beschreibt einen einzigen Tag in Dublin, nämlich den 16. Juni 1904. Und weil die Hauptfigur des Romans Leopold Bloom heißt und das Buch seit nun über 100 Jahren viele Hardcore-Fans besitzt, wird am 16. Juni in Irland der Bloomsday gefeiert. Falls ihr das schon mal gehört habt und nicht richtig zuordnen konntet, das kommt tatsächlich von der Hauptfigur des Ulysses. Und Moli, also der Museumsname, der nimmt auch direkt Bezug zum Buch, denn Mr. Blooms Frau, die heißt Molly, was ja fast so wie Moli klingt. Als ich Simon O'Connor getroffen habe, habe ich sofort gestanden, hey, ihr habt das auch nicht gelesen. Und dann hat er gesagt, hier, dann nimm's wenigstens mal in die Hand. Und er hat mir eine historische Ausgabe des Ulysses überreicht. Das erste Exemplar, das 1922 nach dem Original gedruckt worden ist und das das Museum angeschafft hat, damit die Besucher in ihm blättern können.
We have the very first copy that was ever printed. Joyce's own copy of Ulysses that was given to him on his birthday. We have it on display downstairs. It's the most valuable item in the States collections, insured for millions and millions. But a few months after that was published, they printed a second edition with exactly the same plates. So it's an identical copy, and this is one here. Wow! And it's in very good condition. So you can actually you can go through it and you can get a sense of. It was actually a very beautiful book the way it was made.
I don't need to wear gloves.
No, it's fine. No. This is actually it's specifically for handling. Like we went out and found a really good version of it so people could hold it, and I'm rereading it at the moment in this edition. Because I can. Okay, I'll read it in the original format, which will be nice,
Ich kann euch sagen, wenn man Bücher liebt, dann ist das schon ein sehr besonderes Gefühl, in so einer alten historischen Ausgabe des Ulysses blättern zu dürfen, auch wenn man den noch gar nicht gelesen hat. Wo findet man denn sowas? Wo gibt's denn so ein Exemplar 100 Jahre nach seinem Erscheinen? Naja, hat der Simon O'Connor geantwortet, das findet man durch Glück und Zufall.
I had asked a very good friend of ours, who's a great Joyce collector, to keep an eye out around the world for a really, mint condition one of these, and I had a budget, and I expected, I'm probably going to have to travel to who knows where to pick, to find New York or somewhere like this, and then he found one in a shop 2 kilometers up the road from the museum. So I got to go down with my daughter on a Saturday morning and pick it up on the bicycle, and it was kind of fine, and she was shocked, my little kid, she was shocked at how much the book cost, but anyway, she couldn't believe it. She was like, really? That's how much it costs? Just that thing? She'll learn eventually.
How many times did you read it?
I have read it in total. I've read it twice.
Okay.
And I'm rereading it from start to finish at the moment. But I've read a lot of sections quite a few times. Do you know there's particular chapters? The Cyclops chapter, the last chapter, I've read a lot of times. Yeah, so and then some of the chapters, I don't know. I don't know how much they registered.
Of course, it's a very big thing in Dublin.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. It's the most famous book associated with the city. It's like a high definition photograph of Dublin in 1904 of the city. So he was obsessive about the tiniest details. So it's nearly like an historical record, in a way, of the city at that point in time. So when we read it, certainly as Dubliners, when we read it, we don't just get the philosophy and and the artistic experimentation that everybody gets. We also get this thing that's very familiar to us, which is the place we live, coming back at us.
Ein Buch wie eine hoch aufgelöste, absolut detaillierte Fotografie der Stadt an einem Tag vor über 100 Jahren. So sehen viele den Ulysses, und weil die Stadt sich in vieler Hinsicht gar nicht mal so sehr verändert hat seit damals, erkennen Leserinnen und Leser aus Dublin viele Ecken und Situationen bis heute wieder.
So much of what is in the book in terms of physical places still exist. So, and lots of us who live here are very familiar with all of them. And I think the psychology of the people that he presents still exists. The character of the city amazingly still exists in much the same ways. So we can we don't just see our city in the novel. As Dubliners, I think we definitely see ourselves.
Zu allen möglichen Ulysses-Aspekten gibt's viel zu sehen im Museum. Historische Fotos, alte Filmaufnahmen aus dem Dublin zu Beginn des 20. Jahrhunderts, viel Audiomaterial. Das ist wirklich gut gemacht.
So we try to make these, I suppose, unusual artistic exhibitions and installations that are surprising and interesting to people, and in a way encourage visitors to read these writers. Because the real value of their work is when you read it yourself, not in the museum. So we're cheerleaders.
Making PR.
A very large, elaborate literary PR vehicle.
Yeah.
But hopefully, when people visit the museum, and if we continue to make it a really interesting experience for people to move through, and a very welcoming experience, and try and think of ourselves as a bit of an oasis in the middle of this capital city. We have beautiful gardens, and we're set in these beautiful buildings, and we try and make the place just really calm. Yeah, so hopefully people come in and they get all of that, and they go away thinking, I really should read a bit more.
Lust aufs Lesen machen. So ein bisschen sieht sich das Museum in der Rolle einer Werbeagentur für die irischen Schriftstellerinnen und Schriftsteller. Und das funktioniert ziemlich gut. Am Ende nehmen sich viele Museumsbesucher dann tatsächlich was zum Lesen aus dem Bookstore mit. Gibt ja auch genügend Auswahl.
There's a lot of very famous Irish writers.
Yeah.
And there's even more might become famous later on, right?
Yeah, it's it's interesting. We obviously have a great reputation that rests on, for most people, on a few names. You know, names like James Joyce, Samuel Beckett, Oscar Wilde, Brendan Behan, Seamus Heaney, a lot of men
icons.
And icons and and people who have passed away. But then, you know, ever since all of those writers, and during their time as well, we were producing all the time these incredible storytellers who were, like a lot of people in Ireland, moving to other countries around the world. So Irish writing really, I think that's where part of the international reputation comes from. Our writers left and spread out a lot as well, and they travelled. And then today really feels like there's a renaissance in Irish writing again, with all of these really young writers coming up who have, I think, really stepped out of the shadow of those older writers and are making very, very contemporary new things themselves.
The art of writing, has that something to do with the art of storytelling, where the Irish, of course, are masters?
Yeah, I mean, if you look through our storytelling history, so not just the written word, but the oral transmission of story, folk-telling, storytelling through song, that tradition in Ireland, you know, it goes back to pre-Christian times. So we have these really, really rich mythologies. We had a bardic storytelling tradition, people who would literally wander the country and tell stories to people. Different places in Ireland would have their own storytellers that people would visit their house and they would listen to these. So we've always been very connected to story. And I think as children growing up in Ireland, reading has always been really important in this country, and engaging with our poetry and engaging with our writing and our story. So it's no surprise then that a lot of these kids grow up to be adults who create works of art themselves.
Is that still the case nowadays? Do Irish people still read a lot?
Yeah, I mean, a huge amount. We have a massive reading audience here. I mean, that's partly why I think there's such a strong literary tradition, because there's an audience as well in the country. And we have writers who write, I mean, across all different types of audience as well. Amazing writers writing crime fiction, science fiction, young adult literature as well for teenagers. We've got, I mean, some of the most successful young adult writers in the world are from Ireland. And a lot of people my age wouldn't, you know, might not know about them, but their children know about them.
Jetzt gibt's erstmal Lesetipps. Zuerst 2 von mir, da kann der Simon O'Connor mal kurz Luft holen und sich einen Tee machen. Es geht um 2 dieser Bücher, die man abends im Bett anfängt und dann die halbe Nacht durchliest. Und weil man bis zum Morgengrauen irgendwie dann nicht am Ende angekommen ist, liest man eben gleich morgens beim Frühstück weiter. Das erste ist The Bee Sting von Paul Murray, also der Stich der Biene. Die deutsche Übersetzung ist in der Mache, kommt bald. Das ist ein Roman über eine früher mal sehr reiche irische Familie, die aber dann von der Finanzkrise gebeutelt worden ist und jetzt von einer Misere in die nächste rutscht. Ganz toll geschrieben und trotz des ernsten Themas manchmal tatsächlich ziemlich lustig. Also das ist eine absolute Empfehlung. Genau wie auch Audrey McGee's The Colony, also auf Deutsch eigentlich die Kolonie. Deutsche Übersetzung heißt aber das Habitat. Das handelt von einer Insel vor der Küste Irlands, auf die ein Maler aus London und ein Sprachforscher aus Frankreich kommen. Und die beiden führen sich dort ziemlich schnell auf wie früher die Kolonialherren, obwohl sie eigentlich vorgeben, es gut zu meinen. Der eine will die Schönheit der Insel in seinen Gemälden festhalten. Der andere würde gerne den Dialekt der Insel retten. Das ist ein sehr beeindruckender Roman über ein Irland, das so nicht wirklich viele kennen, geschrieben von einer der vielen talentierten Schriftstellerinnen, die es auf der grünen Insel gibt.
As this podcast is also for people not specialized in literature, but traveling around Ireland, could you recommend a couple of maybe new or newer Irish novels that are based in certain areas of the island?
Somebody who's, I think, is amazing, and these are really personal recommendations of my own, but somebody who is really incredible is a writer from the north of Ireland named Louise Kennedy. And Louise, her first collection of short stories is really exceptional, and it's called The End of the World is a Cul-de-sac. And Louise sets a lot of her stories in a way nearly like a no man's land between country villages and cities, places where there are very few people, that are very off the beaten track, where people are living a little bit off the grid in a way. And she has an amazing eye for that type of environment, and the smells and sounds and food and all of that. But they're very, they're challenging stories as well, and very funny and very serious sometimes. So Louise Kennedy, absolutely incredible. And then another I'd recommend would be Claire-Louise Bennett. Claire-Louise's first novel is called Pond, and this is a really, really exceptional piece of work, one of the best novels of the last 10-15 years, really. Pond is set in a small cottage in the west of Ireland, mostly inside the head of the single woman who lives in the cottage, and it's incredible, very experimental, but also isolated in a way that's a lot of us here were very interested to read about somebody in that setting.
I just started reading a book called Firestarter.
Firestarters by Jan Carson.
Yes.
Yeah, Jan is a brilliant writer. I haven't read that novel, but she's superb. Yeah, she's one of the best, one of the most interesting writers from the north of the country as well. That renaissance in Irish writing that I mentioned, I really feel is happening now. I mean, that's not just happening in Dublin, it's happening all over the country. It's happening in poetry, as well as prose and fiction. An amazing amount of actually really incredible female writers as well coming out, which was, it's just really encouraging to see that balance in a way, reputationally for the country, being addressed. That we have all of these amazing female writers going out now and being read around the world.
Woher kommt das eigentlich, dass die Leute in Irland so wunderbar mit Sprache umgehen können? Ja klar, einerseits hat das natürlich mit dieser jahrhundertealten Tradition des Storytellings zu tun, aber Simon O'Connor glaubt, dass da auch noch was anderes dahinter steckt. Für die Iren hat Sprache auch immer etwas Herausforderndes.
I think we're very competitive with language in Ireland. I think it might be a post-colonial thing. Now, there will be academics who will go into a lot more detail about this, I think. But we speak a colonial language here. But there's a great history of Irish speakers of English going to England and, as George Bernard Shaw, I think it was said, colonising the language back. I think we love our control of the English language. I think we really enjoy talking and trying to out-talk each other.
And show the mastery of a language that isn't yours originally.
Yeah, completely. But then there's also, and this is something that we look at in the museum as well, there's also a huge amount of writing in the Irish language, which may not be as visible to some audiences. So a big part of our job in this museum is to also promote that, and particularly to domestic local visitors as well, who maybe want to engage in the Irish language a bit more, but haven't since they were school children.
Yeah, it's always amazing to see if I go to a bookstore in Dublin, and there's one I always go to just around Trinity.
Hodges and Figgis.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And if you enter this bookstore and you go to your left, the whole section is either written by Irish writers or on Ireland. Mm-hmm. And I always find that amazing. You wouldn't find that in Germany.
No.
There's no section saying German writers.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. And, Hodges Figgis is a great... if any of your visitors ever want to go to a book launch in Dublin, Hodges Figgis, a lot of the writers have their book launches in Hodges Figgis, in here at the museum as well. But Hodges Figgis is the real traditional... Mm-hmm. One of the great traditional places for the Irish book launch.
Am Ende wollte ich von Simon O'Connor dann noch wissen, was mich persönlich auch sehr interessiert. Glaubt er, dass das Buch auf lange Sicht eine Zukunft hat? Oder anders gefragt, werden die Irinnen und die Iren in 10, 20, 30 Jahren immer noch Romane lesen?
I think every art form is challenged by the mobile phone and the smartphone. I mean, it's interesting. I think I read somewhere not so long ago that the human race has never read as much as it does now. I mean, the amount of words we read every day is it's something wild, like kind of like 8,000 or 9,000 or 10,000 or something like that per day. You know, but it's not literature. But it's mostly like junk and rubbish, you know, and just like, you know, news feeds and things like this, and bite-sized everything. So, and interestingly, I think when you look at the TV series on Netflix and, you know, Amazon and all of these places, and they're making these like huge, expansive, really ambitious scripts, and you know, we clearly have an incredible attention span when the material is good. I think that bodes very well for books, actually. People, we might think, oh, we have this terribly short attention span, but I mean, we don't. You know, we can read all day and we can watch things all night.
Ja, genau so ist es doch. Und vielleicht ist es am Ende ja dann tatsächlich so, dass die Drehbuchautoren dieser tollen Serien bei den Streamingdiensten, die diese Geschichten erzählen, die 6, 7, 8 Staffeln lang sind, dass die Leute am Ende auch wieder dazu bringen, es doch mal mit langen und komplizierten Romanen zu versuchen. Das wäre doch eine ganz fantastische Win-Win-Situation für alle. Für die Leser, für die Autorinnen und Autoren und ganz generell für die Literatur.
Irisch gut. Stories und Tipps von der grünen Insel.
Wir haben alle Bücher, über die wir heute im Podcast gesprochen haben, in die Shownotes gepackt. Und alle Folgen von Irisch gut, die gibt es auf dem YouTube-Kanal von Entdecke Irland und natürlich, das wisst ihr, bei Spotify, bei Apple Music und bei all den anderen. Und vielleicht seid ihr ja dann auch beim nächsten Mal wieder mit dabei. Ich würde mich freuen. Cheers und bis ganz bald.